This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 301, Quahog. Or alternatively, if you're a patron, you've heard it said Quahog and Quahog already. But I think we're going to stick with Quahog. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Today we're talking with Jason Palmentel about his most recent project, Quahog. It's the new website platform for the state of Rhode Island. I'm Nick Laughlin, and today I'm joined by Jason, who's been a regular show again for the last 4 weeks. He's been designing and building for the web since 1994 and has specialized in web topography for the last 10 years. One of the leading experts in using variable fonts, he consults with nearly every major type and web browser company and is an invited expert to the web fonts working group at the W3C. Over the past several years, he has published countless articles, newsletters, and sites focused on teaching web topography, exploring the design and technical capabilities of variable fonts, and has delivered talks and workshops on the subject at over 100 events and conferences around the world. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks. It's been a lot of fun to be here.
And joining us as usual, John Picozzi with EPAM. What's new with you this week?
What is new with me? So a couple of things. One, I realized that I have a RSS feeder in my browser that pulls in the security alerts, the Drupal security alerts RSS feed. And at some point, I don't know when this was, but they split the core and contrib RSS feeds. So the security alerts RSS feed for core is now separate from contrib. So if you have an RSS feed reader set up somewhere that's pulling those, you may want to check to make sure that you have it looking at both the core and contrib feeds. You can also reach out to me and tell me that I'm an idiot and it's always been that way and I just haven't noticed, because that is also completely possible. But it's just something I noticed this week and thought I would share it.
So also joining us this week, Jason Palmentel. What's new with you this week?
Well, like I mentioned last week, we were in the midst of launching a whole bunch of websites, and we've launched 10 in the last 2 weeks on the Rhode Island platform. So that's been really exciting. And that's been in the midst of some family visits and going to visit family for the first time in a year and a half. And it's been a lot of back and forth. It's been a little exhausting, but I'm super proud of the work that we've been getting out there on this platform. And it was just awesome to get a chance to see everybody. We went to New York City last weekend, and it's the first time we packed a bag and left the house in, a year and a half. Since last February, we went and looked it up. That was the last time we went to see my wife's parents.
Wow. Yeah. The reconnecting is definitely nice.
Completely off topic. Jason got the rod for his chandelier and was able to hang it, apparently.
Yes, we finally have the new light fixture up behind me. You can see it right over there. It's a very nice looking chandelier. We're very happy with it.
It does look great. I noticed. I was like, oh, look at that. That's nice. Nick, what's going on with you?
Well, actually, I had a pretty exciting weekend. So it was my birthday last weekend, and I had just planned on going to my mom's house and hang out. And my wife, Joanna, managed to throw a surprise party for me.
That's great.
At my house while I was here. So I have no idea how she pulled it off, but I was, we were just outside kind of hanging out, waiting, because my mom had planned something. But apparently Joanna had already planned the surprise party. So we were just kind of outside. We had some breakfast and then just kind of hanging out. And she's like, I don't know, she said, like, I need to go get water or something inside. I'll be right back. Just wait here. I was like, okay, like, I'll just hang out outside for a little bit. And then like Kitako started barking like crazy, like somebody had just come. So I got up to see what was going on, looked over the fence and saw a couple friends coming up the driveway. I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, I guess they just came by to say hi, say happy birthday, whatever. So I went inside to say hi to them. And there were like 10 people in the house already. I have no idea how she let them all in.
They were hiding under the stairs.
No, I mean, they had just been arriving. Somehow she kept Kitako from noticing the first few people arriving. But yeah, it was really nice. Everybody was vaccinated. There were a bunch of friends we hadn't seen in a year and a half. It was only about 10 or 15 people.
That's great.
Had a barbecue, had a chance. Like there were so many things like looking back that I would have realized were hints at it if we were in normal times. Like we got a new grill. She was super insistent that we had to get the new grill right away. And I was like, what's the rush? We don't need it. And she wanted it for the party. But yeah, it was really nice. It was good to reconnect. And people throw surprise parties, but usually it's like you have to get the person somewhere else or you get them away from the house and everybody shows up. She managed to throw one while I was at the house while people were arriving.
I feel like that's a blog post title. Like COVID helped plan my surprise party.
Yeah, I try to stay away from clickbait titles, but maybe. Yeah, it might be an interesting.
No, the clickbait title would have been 37 ways that it helped.
Yeah. So yeah, it was a nice weekend. It was nice, like I said, to reconnect with some friends and, even the details, like she like routines changed and I just didn't notice, like she had like all the meat marinated, like tons of meat marinated in the fridge. And I have no idea how I didn't notice that. Cause like,
you just thought that was normal. Oh, okay.
No, like she made dinner the night before and I was like, okay, like maybe she's making it, we trade off, but usually I cook on the weekends. So I thought maybe it was just because of my birthday, she was just being nice or she just felt like cooking or whatever, but it was so that I didn't go in the fridge and see the 10 pounds of meat. Cause then I would have been like, why do we have, these giant vats of marinating meat? Huh. But yeah, it was a good surprise and very well executed.
Well, because the listeners love it, and we're bringing back the module of the week. And this week's module of the week, we misspoke in episode 300 because Nick and I both thought that we had already done the diff module. Turns out we hadn't, so we're gonna do it now. So the diff module is a great little add-on module that helps you understand the differences between revisions in Drupal. So after installing this module, provided you have revisions turned on your content type, if you go to the revisions tab, you'll be able to see a diff of the fields that have changed and what has changed in them from one revision to another. So super helpful when making content edits on a page and somebody changes a name or a number or something. You want to be able to see what the change was. You can see it right there with the diff module. Very similar to, if you're familiar with Git's diffing mechanism. Have either of you used the diff module before?
Absolutely.
I feel like it's been installed on some stuff that I've worked on before, but we don't have that as part of the Rhode Island platform. And I think that may be an evolution of it, is that I think more people are going to be using the workflow that we have set up. I'll talk more about that in a little while, but this would be helpful for people to get a sense of what has changed and what they should look for if they're going to be approving the content.
Yeah, it used to be kind of required in the Drupal 7 days with features because it was kind of an add-on for features. You could see what's changed between or why a feature isn't, reverting. Like you can just see what changes are there that weren't being applied. But it's also useful for content. I've most often in the past used it for features, but there's been a few sites that were editor heavy with those types of workflows where diff really just made sense so that, like you said, people approving the content can just see what the difference is. So they don't have to review the whole page every single time. So speaking of the platform, I think we should start with people that maybe aren't from New England. What is a quahog?
A quahog is a big clam. So they're usually, it is as a large mollusk. It is, they're usually 3 or 4 inches across. They've got a really thick, heavy shell, sort of vaguely triangular in shape, and they're most often used in chowders. So like chopped up and cooked in clam chowder. A good Rhode Island clam chowder, or really most of what you'd get in New England is likely to have that kind of clam in it. So they're little neck clams that are ones that you might have in pasta, or clams on the half shell, that kind of thing. These are just much bigger. And it also happens to be a state animal of Rhode Island.
And
Fun fact. Do you know, Nick, the difference between New England clam chowder and Rhode Island clam chowder?
No, actually.
New England clam chowder is made with cream, and Rhode Island clam chowder is a clear broth.
Well, I do know one time I went to New York, maybe 10 years ago, and I ordered some clam chowder, and I got New York style clam chowder.
Manhattan,
and it was
clam
Manhattan
chowder.
Manhattan clam chowder.
Yeah.
It was horrifying. It was tomato and clear.
Yeah.
Oh, as somebody, like, you say clam chowder, I expect New England clam chowder. I don't accept anything else as a clam chowder.
So those are the three like big varieties of clam chowder. When I was in high school, I worked at Tucker Seafood, and they were one of the perennial favorites in the chowder cook-off in Rhode Island. And and they would always start with the Rhode Island chowder, and then that would be the base, and then they would make the sort of the white chowder from that. But the stock, like the base of it, was always that broth chowder. And I appreciate all three, but like I definitely gravitate to white chowder. That's kind of what I think of most often. But I do the Rhode Island chowder is really good. It's a little bit lighter, so after if you have a bowl of that, it's not quite as sort of like, you don't have quite the stuffed feeling that you have after having a big bowl of white chowder.
Less of a meal, more of a precursor to something else. Yeah. So
otherwise known as an appetizer.
Could be that. Could be that.
Yep. There's always that soup course in between your appetizer and your entree. Anyway, let's get back to technology. Jason, can you tell us a little bit about the technology that's powering the Quahog platform?
There's no technology powering a clam, John. So Quahog initially was what I was referring to as the design system for the platform that I've been working on for about a year. And that is something, the design system that we put together was built in Pattern Lab, in Pattern Lab 3. And it's using the Twig rendering engine. It drops nicely into a Drupal theme. And so what that did was it allowed us to work separately. We'd work in Pattern Lab and work on design and front end separately from the development of the content model, content types, views, and things like that in Drupal, while we were working out how we wanted the workflows to work, testing out different modules and approaches to the overall system architecture. So that's what that was a big advantage for us in working on this. So we had Pattern Lab, we had Drupal 9, which at the time was really very new, and we were not entirely sure we'd be able to launch the platform on it, but we really wanted to try. So we had been working closely with the technical account managers at Acquia because the intent was to be deploying this on Site Factory. So we wanted to make sure that we had all the things working together smoothly so that we'd be able to take advantage of the platform and everything else. So I kind of skipped over a little bit of the precursor of exactly what it is that we're building. So I guess I should actually start there. And the idea for this project was to create a new web platform for state agency websites in Rhode Island. And that was a really exciting prospect. I've lived in Rhode Island since, for the most part, since 1986. minus a few years. So I was going into my sophomore year in high school when we moved here. And
Okay.
I spent a few years racing bicycles and moving around after I graduated in '89. But by and large, I've been here in Rhode Island ever since. And as long as I've been involved in the web, I've wanted to be able to apply that and help out the state to have a better web presence. And it actually started at one of our Drupal PVD meetups back in 2015 or 2016. It was actually when Lellabot still had their office here in Providence. We were holding the meetup there. And Tom Weil from Rhode Island Interactive came and wanted to introduce himself to me and talk to me about Drupal and whether or not it could be something to adopt in Rhode Island. And we started talking more and more and eventually pitched this idea to the state back in 2016. And it took a few years, but it finally percolated back around, and when there was an RFP process and a whole bunch of other things going on. And eventually we were able to work something out where, because Rhode Island Interactive, which is a subsidiary of NIC, already had a contract to do eGov applications here in the state, they were also responsible for the web presence. But because they had that that initial contract, we were able to work with them as a provider and extend that contract to build this platform. And they were already talking to Acquia. They knew they wanted to go with Drupal. We'd spent a lot of time talking to them about the different architectural approaches, and they knew about the work that I had done with Georgia on their Drupal-based web platform, which was actually also was built by Lellabot. But I'd spent a lot of time working with Georgia on their design system and typography, and so they knew I had familiarity with state stuff, and that was a comfortable fit for the state and for NIC to have me involved in the project, which I'm really grateful for, because we got to really drive this the way we wanted to, and push on the design and the technology, and create something that was repeatable for each agency. And so eventually we'll hopefully get all of them over on it.
So I'm curious, because Massachusetts just recently went through a massive rebuild too on Drupal. It was a couple of years ago now, so I assume they were on Drupal 8 to begin with. Was there any discussion between the teams leading both those projects to kind of, I mean, I know you were on the Georgia one, but each state, obviously runs into different issues.
Well, I actually, when I was at Isavera, we had the contract to do the training for the development team in Massachusetts. So I conducted a lot of the Drupal training for their team. And I know amongst us, we know tons of people on that team. It's a really talented bunch of people. But they had sort of a fundamentally different approach to the architecture. And I've actually spoken with Brian, the head of that team, for many times, and their approach was a more centralized one, where it's a single site that has many content contributors, versus the architecture that we knew we would need to go with in Rhode Island was separate websites for every agency. Now, Massachusetts was trying to follow more of the gov.uk model, which was single site tagged content and more task driven for the end user, which I think is a really great idea. It's just the political reality in many states, just as it is in many departments and universities, is it's sometimes hard to get everybody to go along with the idea of giving up your own site. And so the compromise in this case was, we're going to create a consistent design system. It's going to have the same typography. It's going to have a few different color palettes you could choose from. And then there will be a bunch of design flexibility you get out of layout builder and paragraph components, but it's the same content architecture. And so my goal is that we'll be able to do more sharing of content between sites, because we know the structure of that content in the future. But it's the first thing we've got to do is get everybody onto the platform in the first place. So I think a really good architecture for citizens is not always, oh, hey, there's Tristan behind me. How about that?
Yep.
It's not always the most conducive to working within existing government structures. And so this was a good happy medium. And so far, we haven't had any really significant pushback on that from the agencies themselves. Everybody's been pretty happy with the capabilities. And so they've been willing to accept that maybe they don't have as much freedom as they used to have in changing the design and the color palette and things like that. Because we've tried to educate people that that's what's really important for citizens, is that they have some form of consistency that gives them a greater level of trust that they are on a real government site. And they've been all over the map in Rhode Island in the past because they have different templates based on whenever the last time was they were redesigned.
Yeah. So did you look at other technologies as well when you were designing the system, like non-Drupal platforms that different states use or different cities maybe?
Not that much. I mean, we did conceptually, look at the approaches that states were taking. And I'm familiar enough with different content management systems, front ends, static site generators. All of those things have a place. But the state was already really interested in Drupal, and I knew it would be a good solution and one that could handle the variety of content that would be needed, and I think would give us the flexibility to build on it going forward. Plus, it also ties into Site Factory, so the ability to scale up and add sites. They also ended up licensing the web application firewall and CDN through Cloudflare and Acquia. So it's a really robust architecture. And I knew we'd be able to deliver both on the design side and the content management side. So that I'm not familiar enough with other platforms to be able to be as involved in the architecture. And that, so it really seemed to fit to just kind of lean into where they were already looking and just go with that platform because we knew it would work. And as far as the front end goes, which I don't think was actually the part of your question, but I know other people will be thinking about it. There was zero chance that it was going to be anything other than HTML, CSS, and a minimal amount of JavaScript being delivered. There's no way there was going to be a JavaScript front end on this. Too big a performance penalty on end users and too big a dependency on JavaScript. Government services need to be performant.
Accessible.
They need to be reliable. They need to be accessible. They need to work on every device. They need to not tax people by burning up their battery every time they try and load a page. And all of this stuff was happening at the onset of the pandemic. And it was so clear that so many sites that were built that way were just falling over. Or they were just so bloated, they'd be trying to shove 7 megabytes of content down on the homepage of a COVID website when people were dying because they couldn't get this information. So I felt pretty strongly that it needed to be lean.
Just a little bit? Because everybody, I don't want to turn this into the front end JS framework of choice show, but, everybody talks about, Gatsby, Vue, whatever your choice is, right? And how fast they are and how quickly they load. What was the thinking behind, or what was the rationale behind not going that route? And obviously it was speed related. You wanted the site to load quickly and easily for folks, but one of the deciding factors for those systems is usually speed. So what was the difference here?
I know that those things can deliver quickly, but they're not going to deliver as quickly as already cached HTML and CSS. They won't be as fast. So, and there was no, it wasn't an issue of developer speed, because we're able to move really quickly with Drupal and Pattern Lab. So I didn't see any real benefit to working with that. The skill set to get somebody up and running with Pattern Lab is just the basics of front end. As long as they're familiar with using Sass, we can walk them through getting the build process up and running. They don't even need to have Drupal. So I worked with Oomph, where you used to be, John, on this. You know very well. We had Jay Hogue and I doing most of the design work. Jay is the design director, head of UX at Oomph. He never ran Drupal. He only built up Pattern Lab, and we were able to work just fine. And then I had Pattern Lab and Drupal running, and I would then work with Jordan, one of your front end engineers, on the rest of the Pattern Lab integration. And so we had these different workflows that were really fast. We went, I know this was one of the questions coming up, but we went from starting the project, we didn't even install Drupal before August 1st, and we launched the first site on a fully functioning platform the second week of December. So I would say there's no way that it would have gone any faster. I mean, we had everything already working from a functional standpoint sometime late September. So, I mean, it was incredibly quick for us to work this way. And it was a small team. I think we never had more than 5 people working on it.
Oh,
And
wow.
So going back to the original question about front end, basically you weren't seeing any huge improvement over your cached HTML CSS version versus the Gatsby. That was the kind of main factor there.
I will go further than that. And this is, I know lots of people who are incredibly talented and work wonders with some of these JavaScript platforms. I was completely confident that it would be worse. It would be a worse experience overall for the citizens if we were to go that route. And I one of the driving things with this was accessibility, and part of that is access. So if you're looking at what it takes, what is the cost in bandwidth, in processing power, it's electricity. I mean, it's traced to a whole lot of things. Every time you add more complexity to the front end, you increase the cost. And so, nationally, roughly 1/3 of adults opt out of broadband internet access to do something over their phone. And so if that, and during the pandemic, it was something like 88% of internet consumption by adults in the US was on a mobile device. So all of those things lead toward what is the fastest and lightest weight way we can deliver government services. And that is going to be the way we built it. Lean HTML semantic markup, good CSS that's well layered and progressively enhanced, and as little JavaScript as we needed to make everything function well.
And that's, I think that's probably one of the big takeaways here, right? Is every decision that was made, or I won't say every, but most decisions that were made, with this platform, it appears had the end user and the folks of the state of Rhode Island in mind, which I think is really awesome.
Thanks.
Going back to the planning aspect, you talked about kind of the spin up time, if you will, or the time between project kickoff and first site launch. Can you dive into that a little bit more and just give us an idea of maybe in months how long it took you guys from like, hey, we're going to do this thing, to, hey, here's the first site and it's up and running and working and
sure,
looking good?
Well, the project was supposed to be signed March 10th of 2020. And the first lockdown in Rhode Island was announced March 9th. So that kind of put a dent in things. And it took about 3 months more for us to work with the state and figure out a way that we could fairly position the project as something that would support our COVID relief efforts. And so to do that, we decided that the first thing that we would do is focus on COVID-related sites. So there was no COVID dedicated site in the state yet. So that was the first thing that I pitched to them was, instead of having it be a section of the Department of Health site, what if we did covid.ri.gov and make that the first site that we launch on the platform? And there were a couple of other sites that they already had that were related to food delivery services available and housing deals available for frontline workers who were coming from out of state to work in Rhode Island. And there were a lot of them. So that at that time, there were tons of healthcare workers that were basically just being moved around the country wherever they were needed. And so there was RI Havens and RI Delivers were the two sites there. And so we got that approval and were able to start basically beginning of June in 2020. And so I spent the first 2 months of the project doing research, stakeholder interviews, interviewing citizens and business owners, and really trying to get a good sense of what people were looking for. What did they want to get out of it? What were their points of frustration? And obviously, we could have interviewed 100 people and learned even more, but taking a Steve Krug sort of approach, I interviewed maybe a dozen, 15 to 20 at most people, both in agencies, in IT leadership, other government leadership in the governor's office and other areas, and kind of coalesced around the kinds of I don't want to even say personas, but it was in that direction. Like, who is the audience? What are the kinds of things that people need to do, and what's their approach? And so that really kind of helped shape ideas for a content model and flexibility when we were trying to think through not only a solution for a COVID site, but also just in general, what do state agencies need to do? And so, it's the project was not to build a website. The project was to build a platform that can build many websites. Yeah. And that required a little bit extra layer of abstraction, but across all of those different agencies that we're looking at, surveying all of the existing agency sites, I built out a content model in collaboration with the dev team and a bunch of people in the agencies that we felt could support the largest share of content that we could sort of envision from across all these different agency websites, and looked for the different sort of points of flexibility that we would need in order to make this manageable. Thought through the workflows and the business requirements for the state. It needs to be launchable quickly. It needs to be tied into their Active Directory for user authentication. It needs to support workflows. So we had to kind of map all that stuff out, and there's pages and pages of stuff that we wrote up and diagrammed and looked at. And we actually started the active prototyping in August. That was when we first installed Drupal and started going through migration processes, testing D9, Insight Factory, all these different little bits that we needed to confirm. And so it was August, September, October. We had a functioning site that still needed work on the theming, but all the functionality was there. The design system had been working along separately as we were integrating that throughout November. And by late November, around Thanksgiving, so August, September, October, November, about 4 months, wow. We had a pretty fully functioning system. And in those last couple of weeks in December was QA cleanup, content work. We had a content freeze on Friday, and Monday and Tuesday we were finessing things with the team from the health department, and I think the site went live on either Tuesday or Wednesday, wow. Right in the middle of December.
That's impressive. So how many sites are now on the platform? Because you mentioned in the last couple of weeks launching some.
We had RI Havens and RI Delivers launched the following week. So all three of those were live in December. And then we were quickly moving into migrations of a couple of other sites. So we had the Executive Office of Health and Human Services and the Office of Healthy Aging both launched, I think it was end of February, maybe, when those sites went live. And then we went into another migration set after that, and we just launched almost all of those. I think we may be launching another one this week for DCYF, children, youth, and families. But over the previous 2 weeks, we launched, I think, 10 sites, maybe more. I think we've got 14 or 15 live now on the platform. And we'll be sort of rolling into another migration set in July. Basically, they're structured like around 15 or so sites every 3 months between now and June of next year.
So the goal. So how many are there total? Like 70, 75?
Well, the goal is there's somewhere in 70 to 75 site range is what was covered in the initial statement of work. And there are also some additional sites that, now that we've got the platform built up, the Department of IT web services team at the state is actually working on other sites. So they redid their own site. We just launched it for them. The Department of IT launched their own site last week, or 2 weeks ago rather, and they're working on several others. So the whole goal from the beginning was to help them be more self-sufficient in launching sites. I work with them on where there's a need for overhauling information architecture or making some of the design decisions about layout patterns and things like that. But generally, they're already working on their own on 4 or 5 other websites. So I suspect that we'll be more in the 80 to 100 range by the end of, by midway through next year, which is just incredibly exciting.
Yeah, that's a fast pace.
Yeah, it is a little dizzying. But the migration process that we set up is really pretty cool. We've got 2 sets of migration scripts that are organized so that we can migrate files, which is a huge thing. Like, we're about to do the taxation website, and legally they have to have all of those files available. There's about 2,500 files.
Oh, that's it. I thought it'd be way more than that.
It was more than that on, no, I'm sorry. It was 2,500 files on the EOHHS website. Tax has about 3,800.
Okay.
And they legally have to have those available all the time, and all the versions. So the migration process that we set up was it was originally done by Phil and Ben, 2 amazing engineers at Oomph. And what the way it works is, since we had to preserve the old URLs, we first do a scrape using Screaming Frog of the old site and make 2 spreadsheets, one of pages and one of files. And then we use the migration script to look at that spreadsheet and import all the files, bring in aliases for all of the old URLs. So once the domain moves over, it's exactly the same path to get available to get to that file, and then make media items out of all of them. So now we can use a file listing component. And one of the things that we're working on right now is adding in a module that will replace the file name in the path to download the file with media entity ID /download or something like that. And so that way we can have a file path to the download that is not the actual path to the file. So that way we can have versioning. If they go through the process and they are uploading a new version of that file, the original URL doesn't have to change. And so that going forward gives a little bit level of abstraction in there, so we can still have a workflow management process in Drupal, and the file name might get incremented as it normally does in Drupal, but the end user never sees that. They always have a consistent download link to get whatever is the most recent version of that file.
Yeah, which is useful.
Interesting. So moving over sites obviously is the goal right now, is the priority. Adding features as you go, as you see sites that need new features is ongoing. What do you think the end goal is ultimately of the project? Is it every site is on the new platform and the state can be self-sufficient in setting up new sites, or is there some higher calling?
Well, there's a couple parts to that, and some of it is what I want to see happen, and some of it is what the state wants to see happen. We are evaluating each site as we go to see if there's anything that needs to change. So, we looked, I mean, it's one thing to say, I'm going to go look through 70 websites and try and come up with a common feature set. Mm-hmm. Well, you're only going to catch so much. I mean, there's only, and especially when you've only got one or two people that, are tasked with doing this. I mean, we have done this on a very, very lean budget and timeline and staffing, which I think is okay, because I think we're going back and we're iterating on this as we go. We're in the midst of a new development phase right now. So we had it planned from the beginning that we'd go through the first couple migration sets and we'd take a look at what we built and we'd see what we missed. And so we did that. And so for the last few weeks, we've been rolling out some new work that extends some of the components, visually extends some of the functionality. It adds in a few things that we hadn't really thought of before. And we have a backlog of improvements that we hope to kind of roll out every month as we do more maintenance work. But every once in a while you hit upon something that's totally different. And the Department of Health website was one of those. So that's a really big website. The main Department of Health site is a much bigger one. And so we have to look at that and see, could we bring it over, or does it really need to have something a little bit different? And so we evaluate those things as we go. I think the conversation with one agency started out at the beginning with an insistence that they had all this stuff that was totally different. And by the end of the first call, they realized that we actually already had everything they needed. So some things are more about people reevaluating what they've been doing in the past, or just taking the time to understand everything this platform supports. So, but with Layout Builder for landing pages, we can be incredibly flexible on home pages and other sort of special purpose or higher level pages on the sites. And then we use paragraphs in content construction. So on a basic page, when you're building up content, if you want to add in media, it's really easy to do. If you want to add stepped numbered components, if you want to add little expanding accordions, there's all different kinds of components that we created that all, each of those map back to patterns that we created in Pattern Lab. And it does create an incredibly flexible sort of constellation of components that people can work with to create some pretty unique websites. And we've been running training workshops. We've broken it down into 4 different workshops that we do with people, and we're running those twice a week. So 1 and 2 one week, and then 3 and 4 the next, and so on. And we've got it tied into the state's learning management system now. And we'll end up adding, we have got a documentation site. We'll be adding more videos to that as we go. And so we've got learning resources that we're building up that goes along with it. And, so the goal is for the agencies to be really self-sufficient, to have a system that, at the moment we're using features in order to enable things for one site that another site might not need. So speeches and executive orders on the governor's site, for example. So we still have a single code base, and that's, we need that if we want to leverage Site Factory. But then we can enable the features that we need on a given site. And that's our path for expansion right now, is if there's something new, we'll look at it and try and make it as universal as possible, so that we just enable it for everybody. So if we need, and if it turns out that they actually all want to have blogs, then we'll build a blog feature. Currently we have a press release feature, which is really similar to that, but it's specific to press releases. So we want to make sure that we also manage complexity for the administrators. And if they are used to a process of, I need to post this press release, they go to the content menu and they add a press release. And so we try and balance the universality versus keep the mental load lower, so you don't overwhelm people by say, well, you use this content type, but then you need to call it this and then do this other thing. We want to make it as easy and quick to learn and use as possible on a day-to-day basis.
So it sounds like the end goal is to build a system for the people and allow them to do their jobs a lot easier.
Yeah, I'd say, Nick, I know you've got something else you wanted to add, but I just want to say my hope is that by building this consistent foundation, that in the future, the ability to create that layer on top, whether it's just search or really being able to create collections of tasks, because I think boston.gov and mass.gov both have fantastic sites that really focus around what are the things that you need to do as a citizen when you're interacting with the government. And those things very often cross agency lines. So, they did a ton of great research in Georgia, and they found that I think it was like the average was 6 or 7 different websites that someone would interact with to do a given thing. Whether it's opening a business or registering, getting a permit for something or whatever, like they would always have to traverse all of these sites. And it would be really nice if you didn't have to do that. But if you do, then at least if we can give you a consistent experience in the UX and the visual design, you have a much greater level of confidence that things will be as they seem, that they'll actually work. And you can trust that people do what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, I mean, most people aren't going to notice the subdomain changing if they're clicking a link. If there's good, if the flow takes them through 3 subdomains because they have to do 3 tasks on 3 different agencies, as long as the design system's the same, most people aren't ever going to notice that. But if they're all, one looks like it was built in 2000 using Dreamweaver, one's on Drupal 6, and one's on WordPress, and one's just handwritten HTML, then that's going to be a harder experience for that person.
Yeah. And that's, I should have mentioned that we are replacing websites maintained in Dreamweaver.
It wasn't an accident that I used that example, because I was very confident that would be the case. I've worked on government sites before, so yeah, I am familiar.
Yeah, it is effectively, we're replacing static websites for most of these agencies.
Yeah, which, the static sites were probably very fast, but with all the caching and with Drupal's, backend system and Cloudflare, you're probably not much, there's not much of a performance hit there.
We did some benchmarking on the old versus new DHS website, the Department of Human Services. That was one of the ones we launched in the last couple of weeks. And it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 4 times faster on every benchmark. So we used web page test. We benchmarked the old DHS site, a Drupal-based one in Georgia, one in Pennsylvania that I think was on SharePoint, and there was one other one that we looked at, and we beat all of them hands down, and we beat our own margin of improvement. I mean, the benchmark that we try and beat is at least 20% faster on start render, on document complete, full download, and data. We try and beat at least by 20%. So it's a noticeable difference. And it was hovering between 3 and 4x. Wow. And the full homepage size was 564K.
Wow.
And it's a really good looking page. I mean, it is not like we're not using any images. It's just, it's all working really well. And we're leveraging the technologies in a sensible way. And it reduces the load on the backend services. It increases the performance for the front end users, and they have it tied together nicely with Acquia's purge module, so that when you make a change on the website, it gets flushed all the way out, and people see the change right away. So we don't, we're not constrained in those same ways that we used to be with Drupal, where you'd be worried about caching the front end and you'd be
Yeah.
telling the client that, don't worry, your press release will be up in 4 hours. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
This stuff happens right
Those
away.
days.
Because, this was the COVID site was the first one launching. When they put up a new press release, it has to be there. If they have new guidance on masking or vaccinations or whatever, it has to be there.
Yep. Makes sense. So you've mentioned a couple of times Pattern Labs, and I'm actually working with a client right now converting their entire front end to using Pattern Labs with Drupal. I'm curious how the team used it for this project, and what the integration was like. How did that process work for you guys?
So it was. I've worked with Pattern Lab and Drupal for probably 4 years or so. Since phase 2 rolled out their first Drupal Pattern Lab theme integration. So it's been a while, and we did a bunch of sites with it when I was at Isavera, and I've done more since then. This time, what I wanted to do was actually rather than looking at how it had been done on previous projects, I wanted to see what we could do. One, keeping Pattern Lab as a separate repository, because I wanted to preserve what's good about Pattern Lab is that you can pull it into other projects and platforms. So I didn't want to compromise on that. And then I wanted us to be leveraging it in as sort of close to native a way as possible. So I didn't want to add a whole lot of other people's plumbing in there. And I have to say that while there's probably a rough edge or two for us to work out with passing attributes in from Drupal, almost everything is working with very little overhead. We have to add the components module, but that everybody needs that. And anybody that wants to work with partials in the way that we are, and have Drupal recognize those things as template pieces that should be processed. But other than that, there's very little additional code. And we actually have it. I keep 2 repos open in 2 different code windows, one running the install profile and one running just Pattern Lab. And so I can do work in Pattern Lab, and the profile build process is pulling from Pattern Lab into the Drupal theme every time I make changes, every time it builds. So I can be working on the illustrations and adding the styles for those, because we have to have a Quahog illustration that'll be rolling out soon, and allow people to make those changes. I have that going in Pattern Lab, and every time I refresh the local build, I'm seeing those changes. But it still keeps them as separate things for people to work on. We already have 2 other development teams have been looking at what we're doing in Pattern Lab and pulling some of those styles into other platforms and things that they're working on. So I'm really excited at the potential for this long term, because I've seen that go awry where it gets so baked into Drupal that you can't use it anywhere else anymore. And I'm working really hard for us to avoid that.
Makes sense.
So coming off of talking about Pattern Lab, which is obviously one of the, aside from Drupal, one of the major technologies here, let's focus a little bit on Site Factory for the platform. Obviously, you're using Site Factory. What are the pros for using something like that with a site like this?
Well, there's several. One is the ease with which you can deploy a new site. You go in, you log into the admin interface, you go into the site group where you want to add it, and you click a button and enter the URL, and that's it. So it goes through the whole build process of firing up a new site, installing Drupal, getting all the setup done, and then you get an email less than 10 minutes later that the whole thing is set up and ready to go. So it requires no deployment, no code, no technical knowledge really, other than go here and click this button and type something in, and that's it. And so that spins up the site. And and then we have a short checklist of things to go through to handle a few bits of configuration that you can't really script ahead of time, or doesn't get packaged as nicely as we might want. Some of which could probably be improved over time, but it doesn't take more than 5 minutes after you sign in the first time to really have it ready for someone to start adding content. And so we have all the things in there that we want to have. In Pattern Lab, we have all of the color themes defined. We've got 5 different color themes, each with a light and dark mode. We have all of the typographic controls. The whole thing also is driven by variable fonts. There's standard, of course. Georgia was the first one where we did that, and I'm very proud that was really the first large scale use of variable fonts when that first launched in the world. I was really excited about that. So they're in use in Georgia with millions of people every day are seeing the benefits of that. We take that even further, actually, in the Rhode Island site, where when you switch to dark mode, it actually lightens the text just a little bit. So it maintains the same visual weight when you go and reverse the contrast of light text on a dark background versus dark text on light.
So are you using CSS variables for that, or are you strictly?
We are. We actually have a pretty interesting layered approach, and I give Jay Hoag a ton of credit for coming up with a lot of this stuff. We know we need to support IE11. So it's just a fact of life. So everything basically starts as Sass variables, and as the project builds, it creates the CSS variables that we need, but it's all scoped within whether or not an at supports block if variable fonts are supported. And that's kind of our baseline. And so if that's there, then we do all of these other things. And we can use the custom properties in CSS to drive a lot of the theming. And we also use it for driving a lot of things in light and dark mode, in font sizing, and in all kinds of things. Because that's another one of the things that we build in is a user settings menu. And if you open that, you can manually switch to light or dark mode if you want, or you can let it be a system preference. That's where we put the translation when it's available. It's either native translation on the COVID site. They've got Portuguese and Spanish translated content, or we have a Google Translate widget for some of the other agencies that default to that as their process. And then we also have 3 sliders to set the font size, the line spacing, and the word spacing. Because one of the things that I've spoken about a lot and had validated in a very touching way by an attendee to one of my talks, who has somebody who had dyslexia or has dyslexia, and this person was unaware that they also suffered from a condition called crowding. And I'd heard a talk about this a few years back, and the research showed that if you could increase line spacing and word spacing for people that suffer from this condition, you could increase their reading comprehension by 50%, 50.
Wow.
So those are like word spacing and line spacing are just like their basic CSS properties. So I added that in, and basically we set it as a multiplier. So by default, it's a multiple of 1. But if you increase the spacing, that number goes up, and it changes just changes the math on the line height and the word spacing and the font size, and it allows somebody to customize the setting the way they need it, and it saves it in local storage, and so it persists as they move across the website.
Wow.
And so this again is also I think one of, if not the largest scale implementation of all of these features together. And yeah, I'm sure other people are doing stuff like it, but this combination of them I've gotten really good feedback about, and I kind of feel like I needed to put up or shut up. I've talked about these things for years, and this was the opportunity to put everything that I've been talking about that I believe is important for user experience and better typography and better overall care for the reader of the site, to put the control where it belongs, to let the reader decide what is the best way for them to access this content. And what better place to do that than on government sites that people have to interact with if they're going to get these services.
Correct. Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. I mean, it's always great to hear what you're currently working on. It's always great to see when a state government is kind of pushing the envelope, rather than being 5, 10, 20 years behind the curve. So it's always great. Is there anything that we didn't cover about the project, or how do you plan to really improve in the future, aside from making launching a little bit easier and adding features? Is there any big plans on the horizon?
Well, first, I do want to just comment on what you just said, and as somebody that has been all over the world telling people they should work this way, it was tremendously gratifying to actually get to do it and bring all of it into this project. And the fact that it was a government site platform I'm pretty proud of that. I'm pretty excited by it. Getting a little bit emotional because this is, I think, it is the greatest good that I could do with this work. And that's really important. I think it makes a difference, and I hope it will continue to make a difference. And we were charged by one of the people in IT leadership would continually say, as we were getting started on this, I want this to be the best state website platform out there. And we've tried to actually take the word state out of that. And we just want it to be the best web platform out there that we can make. And I think we're doing that. I think we're hitting it on the benchmarks of accessibility and performance and just access overall, and equity. So we're not requiring high-speed data connections or expensive hardware to be able to render the front end or anything like that. So, we really want to be fair with all of these things, and show that you can use Drupal, you can use relatively standard hosting. I mean, Site Factory is awesome, but you could put a Cloudflare account in front of anything and get a lot of those similar benefits. But the combination of all of these things has been really powerful. We've got Acquia Search embedded in this. We'll be extending that to federate across all the sites as soon as we can.
Yeah.
So that's one of the future improvements, is to enable better search across all of the sites, not just within each one. Searching within files, because files are such a big part of what's on all of these sites. So there's definitely still some areas where we want to improve, more flexibility in design to allow some of the design language features that we've built in about image treatments and things like that to be turned on or off as they're needed, and just smoothing out the admin authoring workflow a little bit more. So it's not so much revolutionary stuff as a solid plan to evolve it into a better and better platform.
Yeah, I think the work that you're doing, Jason, is great. As a Rhode Islander, I appreciate the fact that another Rhode Islander is thinking about how Rhode Islanders use the Rhode Island state websites and working with a Rhode Island based company in OOMF to help you do this is awesome as well.
That was really important to me, and I know that the dev team is sort of spread out, but knowing that Jay was here, you were here, so you were involved in this at the beginning, that was really important to me, that this was something that was conceived of by Rhode Islanders for Rhode Islanders.
Yeah.
But still keeping in mind what are the wider best practices and good ideas from around the US and around the world.
And I don't know if we mentioned this, but we'll mention it again here. You can really tell it was created by Rhode Islanders if you look at some of the theme names and color selections. We'll let you do that research on your own, dear listener, but it's definitely Rhode Island through and through.
It ain't from Rhode Island unless you've got a color named Coffee Milk.
By the way, can you make sure that you add some links to some of these examples on
absolutely.
the resources? Oh, one thing about Pattern Labs I meant to ask, is the Pattern Lab build publicly accessible? Can you see all the different components, or is that
more than that, Nick? And all the repos for the entire platform are public. If you just search for the state of Rhode Island on GitHub, they're all there.
Okay, I know what I'm doing after the show.
Can
I fork in open pull requests? See if I can get some New England clam chowder in there. Get a little bit of Massachusetts in the red state system.
Well, look, that would be an interesting thing to see happen. But the goal was to keep this as open as we can keep it, and I do really think that there is a future of this for more than just state agencies in Rhode Island, whether it's from municipalities or if other people want to try and learn from what we're doing. That would be the best legacy that Rhode Island could leave on the web, is if it helps improve things for the rest of the web too.
If you have questions or feedback, reach out to us on Twitter @Talking Drupal. You can also reach us in the Talking Drupal channel on Drupal Slack, or email us at show@talkingdrupal.com. You can get show updates by signing up for our newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And you can promote your Drupal camp on Talking Drupal. You can learn more at talkingdrupal.com/camp promo.
And thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support's greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and smashing the Become a Patron button.
And I just have to say this is not the first show with us, Stephen, because John and I did a show last year about replying to RFPs, but it's definitely, just want to say thank you again to Stephen for leading the show for so long. And patrons, if you do listen to the patron feed, you'll hear from Stephen today too. Actually, he joined for a few minutes before everybody else came on, just to make sure that we had access to everything and that it was recording. And don't want to oversell it. It was very brief, but he was on the show too. So if you join Patreon, you'll get access to that as well. So thank you for all of the information, Jason. If our listeners have any questions for you or thoughts or comments, how can they reach you?
You can reach me at jpomentel on pretty much every platform. I always love to answer questions, especially on Twitter, because then everybody else gets to hear it too, or at least everybody who's on Twitter. But I like to answer those things out loud, as it were. But you can email me at jason@rwt.io. You can learn lots about web typography at rwt.io. And I look forward to hearing from all of you.
And John, how about you?
You can find me on all the major social networks at John Picozzi, at Drupal.org as well. And you can find out about EPAM at epam.com.
And you can find me pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, NICXVAN. And one last thing before we close out, this is Jason's last week as a guest host. Thank you for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you back on regularly again. And next week, Fatima comes back to finish out her 4-week guest host stint as well.
Well, and always, if you've enjoyed listening, and frankly, even if you haven't, we've still enjoyed talking. And we guess that if you hadn't enjoyed listening, you probably stopped by now. So thanks for being here. I told you I was going to mess with your tagline.
And this will be the last time we let a guest read the tagline.